some of our programs that were more niche, you would average more than 60% of internships turning into employment.
How can a set of skills lead you down the path to success? That's what we're setting out to answer on the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm your host, Michael Sangster. Join me as we unpack how leaders around the world have taken training and skills and turned that into a lasting career. Now let's learn together. Welcome back to the EdUp Canada podcast. I'm Michael Sangster, your host, and I am pleased to have now on our little podcast our fourth doctor. Unfortunately, none of my guests actually have been able to practice or do anything in healthcare. They've all got doctorates that don't let you treat patients. But Dr. Michael McAllister's joined me today, and Michael's a unique individual that has just joined the team at NACC as our Chief Operating Officer to help us bring different perspectives to the team and to the sector. He's got 26 years of experience at Herzing College working in our sector. He was a student of a career college earlier in his lifetime. He's an excited and happy Philadelphia Eagles fan this morning, having just won their Super Bowl. He treats it as if he was actually playing. But he's just an interesting guy with a lot of experience who, upon retiring from Herzing College, I called him the next day and said, would you come join us for a while? He's a former board member, former chair of NACC, but he's just got a lot of experience around the table, which I think is going to be valuable for our team and our colleges as we transition and work through different issues in the future. So, Michael, welcome.
Thank you, Michael. Pleasure to be here.
First time caller, long time listener, as they say.
That kind of thing.
So I wanted to jump right in because you actually, we talked about your university doctorate, you actually started your career going to a career college, didn't you?
I did. Like many, I didn't know they existed. I had no idea. I was working on my thesis and finishing up grad school and realizing the future was not bright in my field for employment around where I live. In the hood, so to speak. Wife was well established and the kids were in school. It's like I didn't really want to pick up for a tenure track teaching position somewhere on the other side of the country. So that's when I looked into what else can I do? How can I complement what I've been doing for the past decade or so in the public system? And that's when I found you could customize your training, go to a college where you weren't in school all over the place, day, night, is just like a normal, morning shift, afternoon shift. And we take you in and a year later, you graduate with all these skills and we help find you a job and all those things. So that is how I first found out about private colleges and how I ended up happily studying at one of them.
What career college did you go to?
I don't believe they exist anymore. It was Redder Business College. And they had campuses in Ottawa and Toronto at the time. And they were still around a decade later, but I'm pretty sure they no longer exist, if they're probably bought out or something.
And that's not uncommon in our sector, that a new generation comes in, rebrands the college, changes the name, or merges it with another one. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It gives the opportunity for the college to refresh, go in a new direction. I always say that our colleges are quick and agile, nimble. We move quickly and do new things, don't we?
Yeah, that is correct.
That led you at some point to ending up working at Herzing College for 26 years. And we usually finish the program talking about a mentor, but I'm going to actually throw into it early because I think the role we've asked you to take on with the National Association working with colleges kind of builds on the mentor you had in the way he looked at the sector and the way he, I don't want to say did things because still does, doesn't he?
He does. So it is Henry Herzing. Obviously, I didn't know about him or know him before I joined Herzing, but going through the private college education that I did, there were a lot of things that I liked about the way that they approached treating their students. It's like you had a voice and that you're just never overwhelmed with a number, not able to speak to someone. So I love that part of it. So when I started, and obviously I had a lot of teaching background at university, so I go out working in the field, and it was the IT field back in 99. naturally, I just gravitated to, I just love to teach this. I've been teaching this other stuff for ages. I mean, I would love to teach technology now that I understand it and know it. So that's how I started teaching at Herzing College. So I didn't, necessarily meet Mr. Herzing right then and there, but one thing led to another. I moved from teaching to being the dean to managing teachers kind of stuff. So then I got to know him, and just his approach just seemed so ethical and the right thing to do. Whether it stemmed from a student complained about something and then we were doing something wrong, whatever it was, he just always acted in the way I thought commanded respect, and you just wanted to do that. So I think that just led into me, how I thought I should treat staff and students.
I had the pleasure of having George Hood, also from Herzing, as my board chair when I started with NACC. And he would often say to me, focus on the students, do what's right for the student. As long as we're doing that, the rest will work itself over time. That sounds like Mr. Herzing, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, you find yourself, if you're in a complicated situation or something that really, I really have to make an important decision on based on all these factors, it always comes down to, in the back of my mind, so, well, what would Mr. Herzing do? What would he do? And then that's guided me ever since.
They never made the bracelets for the employees. What would Mr. Herzing do that you would all wear?
Should have.
Thinking back to the what would Jesus do ones they had at a time, right? They said, we like to have a little fun here. I've had the pleasure of meeting Mr. Herzing, a true gentleman. And 80s or 90s now?
Oh, he's well into his 80s.
Well into his 80s and still working every day, isn't he?
Yeah. He hasn't slowed down. So that's the one thing that probably my wife, Michelle, doesn't like, if I'm using him as an example of, as my role model kind of thing, because my retirement from Herzing lasted about 2 days, so then I was working for NACC. So maybe she's not crazy about that part, but she appreciates what we're doing NACC wise for private regulated colleges and the challenges we face.
I gave you a weekend off. I gave you the whole weekend before you started. We talked about it. I wanted you to start on the Friday, but we gave you till Monday.
Hey, it was a great retirement.
It was a great retirement. You enjoyed it. Did they have a party at the house just for the retirement and then a back to work party as well?
Exactly.
I want to dive into, if you had a student in front of you right now, you've got a unique perspective because I know we've talked about it. Why would you recommend a regulated career college to a student today? And then it's okay to go on a little bit of riff and talk about why a university or why a community college, because I know you believe there's a role for everybody.
I do believe we can all play nice together, honestly, in terms of education that's available out there. And it really, it suits what you happen to be looking for. Because sure, if you're, both of my kids went to public university and that was great. But one of the two came to a private college after, just because, it didn't get her to where she wanted to be. So much like mine did, and looked around, and what she wanted to do, she found, a private college that offered a program less than a year to get her into the field that she wanted to be in, which was the immigration consultant regulated. So she took that program. She is a regulated immigration consultant now, has been for close to a decade now, and no regrets. There's a solution out there for everyone, and it's not always public or private. It could be one and the other, one first after the other, whatever works.
We see that a lot. Students that have come back to a career college to update on some skill or to build on what they've received, and that's a good thing.
And it's usually employment based. And then we know that, right? Our strength is always with our employers and getting people the skills they need to be employed the minute they finish. They do a co-op with us or an internship and they start work. And more often than not, that internship turned into the employment, because anyone that can have an employee and have a look and see what they're like, get to know them, how they fit into their team, they'll hire them if the work is there. And the work is there, that's the field that we specialize in.
So I've had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with you, sometimes over a beer. I would like people to hear the story that you told me about the international student that went through Herzing College in Montreal, I believe it was, but I'm not sure I was in Montreal. Because I think it shows a flavor of the importance of regulatory regimes that are consistent and stable. And while the vast majority of our colleges are not focused on international students, we think we can do more in that area and help train the workforce Canada needs. But you told me a story about a yo-yo experience a student went through and how you helped resolve that in the long term.
Yeah. And it was a long process. It just happened to be when it wasn't clear how the postgraduate work permit worked for privates and publics. So I might have the dates wrong. It was around 2012, I think. No, I'm sorry. It was before that. So it's the late 2008-ish kind of thing. So anyway, they come down, they say, look, we have to make a decision. So private colleges, you're out. You're out of the postgraduate work permit. So, and it was one of those, if you had students already in school, all of a sudden, all these plans they had made and what they could no longer stay in the country after they graduated. So, there's just one student, and that was part of her plan. I got to know her well because she was on ground back then. So you get to know your students if you only have a couple of hundred of them. Anyway, so she had to leave at the end and go back to Brazil. But we stayed in touch because she still wanted to get the Canadian experience, work, and eventually, become a permanent resident. So I kept in touch. And when I moved to the Montreal campus 4 or 5 years later, postgraduate work permit was available to students in Quebec. Now, I didn't want to make this student pay another cent. She invested all that and basically had to go back home right away. So we gave her a scholarship, made sure she'd take a program that built upon the one she took. So she was an administrative assistant type of course in Ottawa. And then she came back to take the full business management course that we had running in Montreal. So again, things had to line up, but we didn't charge her the tuition to make it possible to make up for so what she missed out on years earlier. So she did get all the approvals, study permits, all of that. She did come back. She studied the Montreal campus. She graduated. She learned French. She became a permanent resident in Quebec. So, and she's still working in Quebec City. So that's, and we're still in touch. So that's an example that I use of something I just can't see happening in the public system. You just don't get these little one-offs that are actually possible when you can actually offer that amount of customer service to your students.
And we can't offer the postgraduate work permit in our colleges in Canada, but at one point, Quebec, you could.
Yeah.
And it was very beneficial for the workforce there. It's fair to say the last year has been hard on all levels of post-secondary education. I feel for the community colleges and what they've gone through in their cuts, because they've been, in many cases, their tuition's frozen in Ontario and their funding frozen. So they've had unique challenges, and they went and found a solution. And now that it's been taken away, we're seeing drastic impacts. But it, in a way, speaks to the resilience of the regulated career college sector, because our owners take risks and when they see opportunities, they invest, they build buildings, they open classrooms, and they start teaching more in those areas. So it speaks to our resilience because we've not been reliant on international students and our government funding. But you in Quebec, when you were running a college in Quebec, you had a unique perspective because you did for a long time have a significant amount of international students. And they brought value to the province, didn't they? They did.
Again, the employment opportunities are there. If you give them the skills, early childhood was a great example. In Quebec, we can teach the early educator program. There's such a demand there. I have a large amount of students coming to take that program and all finding employment in the field. And even with the Quebec need for French and right to protect that culture, that had them all learning French, of course. So the government was offering their own French programs, but the colleges stepped up and they're all teaching their students international or local and not happening to be Francophone. They're teaching them French because that's what the ministry wants. You've got to give your regulators what they want. So we want them to be employed, and we want them whatever else the province is looking for.
And if we don't train or offer training opportunities for students and get them careers, our colleges will not do well, right? We have to be targeted and focused on what the career opportunities are for our students, don't we?
Yeah, it's all about your employment rate. So if you don't have, if you're not running a good regulated career colleges, you're not going to survive. You have to have the end result. You've got to get them out there in the workforce, and they're happy to be there, and they had a pleasant experience, whatever sacrifices they made, and they all have to make them. Like it's not easy. Single parent, older, returning to school, whatever the challenges are, you've got to come back and complete the course that they do. We've got to at least get them employed in their field and give them opportunities to grow in that field.
And we're monitored on outcomes, I think might have been the word you're looking for. We're often monitored
KPIs,
on the outcomes.
KPIs are all there to back us up.
I think in many cases we found their student repayment rates too on loans are better because they find employment faster.
Yeah.
And aren't in school as long in many cases. But again, what I said earlier, there is a level for everybody. there is a place for everybody to participate. So let me go back to our own sector and the role I think you can play helping our colleges because of your experience. One of the things that is often not talked about is that in every province, at some level or another, we're under heavy regulation. But there's two things I always point out to people that they're not aware of. Often, not only do we have to prove job opportunities at the far end of a program before we're allowed to teach a class, we got to prove that there is jobs available that will be filled by that skill set. But there's also a percentage of our revenue that's held back for train out funds, as we call it. And people talk about a college failing. Well, we've seen community colleges and universities get into difficulty too. But there's a train out fund that makes sure that that student is not interrupted. It could be as simple as a college winding down because of retirement. An owner is retiring and didn't sell. So talk to me a little bit about, I guess, maybe those two things that I think are really important. And often it's not just a job has to be available at the far end. There also needs to be an employer working with us to do the practical work with the students so they get the skills that are actually needed, isn't there?
Yes. And most of the provinces, I'm most familiar with Quebec now, but I'm sure it's the same in Ontario. So you have to get those letters from employers. So you got to prove there's jobs out there, but then you've got to prove you've got partners in employers that are willing to take those students on their internships and potentially hire them. So yeah, that's all part of the program approval process, and I'm sure it's the same in most provinces.
And the strength of those relationships we see, I'm interested from your 26-year career because I hear it anecdotally, but from your own perspective, those employers that are involved in the practical teaching or sometimes helping become instructors, they hire a lot of those students, don't they? They
do. And our like some of our programs that were more niche, you would average more than 60% of internships turning into employment. You know, it was easier for them and it was great for the students. You've got all that time, whether it's anywhere from a month to 4-month internship to get to know them. You know what you're getting them by then. So the employer, it's a no-brainer to keep them in. And the same thing for the student. They know the culture that they're getting into. If they like that, then they're gonna accept employment there. So it's a great thing. I mean, we say it even in the situation with my daughters and their studies in university. There were co-ops in their programs, and it was the same thing. The experience you get while on internship or co-op is incredible at helping you find the job you need or the job you're looking for.
And interestingly, so we have to kind of applaud just on one note I've noticed in Ontario, the Ford government, not only did they step up training PSWs, personal support workers, healthcare aides, and different words in different provinces, because we're Canadian, can't call the same job, same thing everywhere. They really stepped up and funded the training, but then transitioned to funding the work, the practical, and then looked at funding the first year of work or a bonus if you went into a rural community. So it's really helped with that direct connection with employers too. Like they jump right into new employment.
That was remarkable what the Ontario government did there, because that's exactly what you had to do to fix the situation. A partial fix wasn't going to work. They needed funding for the entire program and to be able to pay them while they're working on their internships, things like that. That's how we were able to deal with the crisis the way that we did. So it was great that they stepped up.
It did for the community colleges as well. It's not for one. We all have a role to play. We had made a capacity. I remember Paul Calandra, who was the Ontario Minister of Long-Term Care at the time, making a comment at an event saying that we changed the path of the pandemic. And not drastically, no cures, nothing like that, but gave the workforce that was needed into long-term care home and hospitals that could help, and home care, could help the doctor take a bit of a break, get the nurse a bit of a breather, get them to get focused on other things they needed to do, but they were too busy doing the day-to-day. We forget, we're getting far away from the pandemic now. We forget. I remember talking to a palliative care home in Ottawa, and their head of fundraising was in charge of cleaning and disinfecting for a year. No fundraising. That was what they did. And we helped bring that workforce in that made a difference. So tell me a little bit about why are you still so optimistic, even though we faced a bit of a beating in the media, but then we were able to turn the corner and prove that we were not the problem with international students. We just did not have the numbers that other did. I mean, as we all know, there was one institution in Ontario, Conestoga College, that had more new international students in the last year that was there were records for than we had in the entire country. Why are you still so optimistic about what we do, and anything about why you're excited to take on this role working with our members?
Well, first of all, start with we can't survive without international students, like Canada in general. We can't. With immigration and international students, it's not going to happen. So yes, they identified there was a problem. I think it's fixable. It does have to be linked to the type of employment. So yes, if they want to be, and we agree they should be stricter on how it shouldn't just be a postgraduate work permit, go do what you want. And I think that's what they're working on. I'm confident they can fix it and come up with that. Say, look, we really need the people in the cyber field and in the healthcare and whatever, and issue their permits that way. It's more complicated, of course, but that's what you got to do. And when you get to that point, there is absolutely no reason to exclude private colleges from this type of arrangement. We're going to be you're all doing the same thing. We are bringing them in for these jobs, and they're getting these permits based on the education they got working in those jobs. So what does it matter if it's a public university or a private regulated college?
I agree completely. We've got such a role to play. And I often talk about some of the provinces that get it right. We need to partner more. We need community colleges partnering with career colleges. There's so much more we can do. And as I said earlier, we feel for them and some of their pain in this funding areas they've had because they run important institutions. Let me go back to you a little bit. Obviously, been very successful. Talk to me about a skill that you developed either early in life, later in life. I've shared a few, but I think one of mine is that I've never been shy or had an inability to talk at a microphone in front of a group of people. And I think I'm pretty good at bringing people together and getting a conversation going and trying to find some outcomes. I know what my weaknesses are. I would never put me as a chief administrative officer for any organization, but talk to me about yourself, some of your own skills and whether you developed it later in life or earlier in life.
I think it would have to be, I like to get all the information. So I'm more quiet. I'm probably the opposite of you. So I'm quieter and I let everybody speak and get all the information and do all the research I have to before making my decision. So, obviously some things are simple. You got to make a decision, yes or no, in a spur of the moment. But I'm thinking you've got topics out there with a lot of different movements. I need to get my head around it. And I need to listen to what everybody has to say. And I do listen. I think I'm a good listener. That's probably up there also. And then I just think I have a logical mind that I can come up with a solution that makes sense and hopefully doesn't offend one over the other. I can mediate.
Making logical decisions around me will help. Most of mine. No, I'm a little more, I don't want to say seat of the pants. General Hillier was a good friend of mine and I was still in touch with. Did a lot of work together, and he used to talk about get to 70% in launch, figure out the last 30 while you're marching, because your plan and your ideas won't survive the first 2 minutes of contact with the enemy.
Yeah,
it's not a bad theory too. But I don't think you're an analytical. You get to decisions, and you'll help our team with that kind of process.
Yeah, I don't think I think too long or too much about it, but I do like to get all the facts.
Anything else that you'd like to say or a message about our sector or just in general? Anything you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, aside from the fact that I believe in the sector and I think there's a great place for us, and I think that we complement the public. We don't, and I wish and I hope that they see that we complement them. There's room for everybody. I see our brand, what we stand for, getting stronger over the last couple of years. And I hate to say it, but that's partially because of you, Sangster, but it is. And so I think we've got momentum. And I think we're still, we've got the KPIs to prove what we're doing is right. What we're doing is needed. So with employment opportunities out there, we're part of the solution to that. And with immigration and a population that's just not getting big enough to sustain the size of our country, we've got to find a way to work with international students that's not going to scare them away. And they are all scared now. And you can't blame them. When you look at our country from the outside in terms of international students, look over the last 2-3 years, they're very nervous. So we got damage to fix just to get the students to want to come back. And then we've got to deal with them the way we think we need to deal with them to get them in to legitimate studying in fields that we know that we need and get employed in those fields. And I think private colleges are going to have a strong part in that, I think.
We need doctors. We need lawyers. We need nurses. We train nurses in some provinces, but not all.
Yep.
So there's a role to play there for colleges and universities. But we also are really good at training logistics people and digital office administrators and healthcare aides and the kind of roles that also have a big impact in our country. So I applaud you on that, because I think we definitely have to be that way. We have to do better at partnership and working together. And I think it's an honor for me to actually represent the sector, because the stories are easy to tell. And I had a meeting on Parliament Hill this morning, chatting with a chief of staff to a member of parliament, and we're having a good conversation. And I talked about a truck driver I met who worked at a Tim Hortons in Shediac, and I think it was Shediac, but New Brunswick. And he's now, instead of making $35,000 a year working at Tim Hortons, he's making well over $100,000 a year, traveling North America with his wife and loving life. And he talked about, I've got to find him again. He talked about trying to figure out how to get a truck to Europe so he could drive in Europe for a year, so he could experience Europe. His whole world has changed because he took a trucking, heavy equipment logistics training course and just got into a career where there was a huge demand and a huge need. So it's nice to see that after 26 years that you've still got that same excitement. I don't find a lot of Toronto Maple Leaf fans who are optimistic, but you still are.
I know.
I do enjoy whenever I get a chance to pick on the Leafs, because, and they're fans because they are a significant amount of them have never actually seen them win the Stanley Cup during their lifetime. And I just applaud their optimism.
I would have been 4 years old. So yeah, I can't say I remember it.
Yeah. So we always hope for them. There's nothing I enjoy more than the Toronto Maple Leafs losing in the finals. So we have a little fun on this podcast and be a little irreverent at times too. So with that, Mike, I'm going to thank you for joining us. I think you're going to have a big impact. And I wanted some of our members to hear from you and others about why you're so passionate about the sector and how they're going to help. Michael's available. We're available anytime you want to chat about things, whether you're in our sector or not. We are an open book about the things we're doing. And I think it's important to put that out there to people. So with that, I'll thank Michael for joining us today. And I will also just offer a moment here of thought of just take a look. We've offered many times, come to a career college graduation, come for a tour, reach out. We'd love to have you come see what we're doing, because we think it's important and we have a role to play. And I look forward to everybody joining us again on the next edition of the EdUp Canada podcast.
Thanks, Michael. And thanks for being a big part of getting our message out there.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the EdUp Canada podcast. We release new episodes regularly, so make sure you hit that subscribe button so you know when they are officially out. If you love this episode, please leave a 4 or 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcasts, so that others can also discover how a set of skills can lead to success. Thanks for learning with us.